Touch me and you'll know why I'm still alive, confessed the Apache widow to the rancher, white heavy check mark. The wind blew softly across the tall grass, and the distant mountains cast long shadows over the land. He had been traveling all day, checking on his cattle and making sure everything on his ranch was in order. Life on the plains was not easy. Every day was a test of patience, skill, and courage. But Thomas had learned to survive, just like the land he worked on. As he rode, he noticed a thin column of smoke rising far in the distance. At first, he thought it might be a campfire made by travelers or hunters, but it was too steady, too deliberate. Curious, he decided to investigate. He guided his horse carefully toward the source of the smoke, keeping his eyes open for anything unusual. The plains could be dangerous, and not all strangers meant well. After an hour of riding, Thomas arrived at a small clearing. There, tucked between a few rocks and a cluster of trees, was a small wooden cabin. Smoke came from its chimney, and the smell of firewood filled the air. It was clear someone was living there, but the cabin looked isolated, almost abandoned. Thomas slowed his horse and observed from a distance. He wanted to be cautious. He had learned long ago that people who lived alone in the wilderness often had reasons to protect themselves. Finally, Thomas approached the cabin. As he got closer, he noticed a woman moving near the door. She was tall and strong, but there was a quiet sadness in her posture. Her long black hair was tied back and her eyes were sharp, scanning the surroundings as if expecting danger. She wore simple clothing, made from cloth and leather, and carried herself with a mix of pride and caution. Thomas stopped his horse and lifted a hand in greeting. The woman noticed him immediately. She did not run or hide, but her eyes narrowed. "Who are you?" she asked in a clear, calm voice. There was no fear in her tone, only caution. Thomas dismounted and stepped closer, keeping his hands visible to show he meant no harm. "My name is Thomas," he said. "I'm just passing through. I saw your smoke and thought someone might need help." The woman studied him for a moment. There was a flicker of curiosity in her eyes, but she did not smile. "I do not need help," she said quietly. "I am capable of taking care of myself." Thomas nodded. He had expected that. People who lived alone in the wild often had to be self-reliant. He respected that. "I understand," he said. "I only meant to offer. If you don't want company, I will leave." The woman hesitated. Something in Thomas's calm, respectful manner made her pause. She finally said, "You may stay for the night, but do not expect food or comfort. This is my home and I have my rules." Thomas agreed. He understood that rules in a home like this were important. He tied his horse to a nearby tree and stepped into the cabin. Inside, the cabin was small but tidy. A fire burned in the hearth, and the smell of dried herbs filled the air. There were simple wooden furniture pieces, a table, a couple of chairs, and a bed covered with animal skins. The woman moved quietly around the cabin, tending to the fire and arranging things with care. Thomas watched her, noticing the careful, deliberate way she handled everything. She was skilled, and it was clear she knew how to survive alone. After a moment, Thomas spoke. "It's a fine place you have here, very sturdy." The woman glanced at him, then back to the fire. "It is enough," she said simply. "It keeps me safe and fed. That is all I need." Thomas nodded again. He could sense there was much more to her story, but he decided not to press. Some stories took time to reveal themselves. The night fell quickly. Outside, the wind howled softly through the trees, and the stars appeared one by one in the dark sky. Thomas and the woman sat near the fire in quiet silence. He noticed scars on her hands and arms, signs of past struggles and hard work. She moved with confidence, and he could see that she had learned to face danger and survive. As the night went on, Thomas felt a mix of curiosity and respect. There was something about her that was different from anyone he had met before. She was strong, independent, and fearless. Yet there was also a sadness in her eyes, a story that she had not told. Thomas knew that to truly understand her, he would need to earn her trust. The woman finally spoke after a long silence. "Why are you here, Thomas?" she asked. Her voice was calm but sharp. "Why do you care about a stranger?" Thomas thought for a moment. "Because we are all human," he said. "We all need help sometimes, even if we don't admit it. And I respect people who survive on their own. I wanted to see if you were all right." She considered his words. There was a pause, and then she said softly, almost to herself, "Most people would not stop. Most people would assume I am helpless." Thomas shook his head. "Not everyone," he said. "Some of us notice strength when we see it, and some of us respect it." The woman looked at him for the first time that evening with a hint of warmth in her eyes. "Perhaps you are different," she said quietly. "Perhaps you will understand in time." Thomas nodded, understanding that her trust would not come easily. He decided to stay the night quietly, respecting her space and her rules. During the night, the wind continued to blow outside, and the fire crackled in the hearth. Thomas could hear the sounds of the wilderness around them, the distant howl of a coyote, the rustle of leaves, and the gentle crack of branches. The woman moved about the cabin silently, checking supplies and making sure everything was in order. Thomas admired her skill and independence. As he lay on his bedroll near the fire, Thomas thought about the journey that had brought him here. Life on the plains was full of unexpected encounters, and he had learned that each person had their own story, often hidden beneath a quiet exterior. He wondered what experiences had shaped this woman, what dangers she had faced, and what had made her so fiercely self-reliant. The woman, Maria, as Thomas would later learn, had a past filled with loss and struggle. She had survived attacks that had destroyed her family and her village. She had learned to live alone, relying on her intelligence, courage, and resilience. Her life had not been easy, but it had made her strong in ways few people could understand. By morning, the sun rose over the plains, casting golden light across the cabin. Thomas woke to the smell of breakfast cooking and the sight of Maria moving efficiently in the small kitchen area. She had prepared a simple meal, but it was enough to show that she cared in her own way. Thomas joined her, and they ate in silence, each lost in their own thoughts but aware of the presence of the other. As he prepared to leave, Thomas realized that this encounter was only the beginning. There was much to learn about Maria, about her strength, her past, and the reasons she had survived when so many others had not. He felt a growing respect and curiosity, knowing that the days ahead would reveal more of her story. Maria watched him as he mounted his horse. There was no smile, but there was a quiet acknowledgement, a recognition that Thomas was not like others who had passed through her life. She had survived because she had trusted few and relied on herself. Yet there was something about this man that intrigued her, something that made her consider the possibility of connection, even if only cautiously. Thomas rode away slowly, glancing back at the cabin. The plains stretched endlessly before him, but he carried with him the memory of the woman who had survived against all odds. He knew that he would return, that her story was not yet fully told, and that the bond between them, born in respect and curiosity, was only beginning. The first part of their story closed with the evening light fading, the wind whispering through the grass, and two lives beginning to intersect in ways neither fully understood. Thomas had found a mystery, a strength, and a story waiting to be revealed, while Maria, the Apache widow, continued to hold the secrets of her past close to her heart, waiting to decide who could truly understand her and why she was still alive. Thomas returned to the cabin the next morning, as he had promised himself. The plain stretched endlessly under the bright sun, the golden grass swaying gently in the breeze. He rode steadily, his thoughts filled with curiosity about the woman he had met the night before. There was something in her eyes, something in the way she moved and spoke, that made him want to understand her story. As he approached the clearing, he noticed Maria outside, tending to a small garden near the cabin. She was focused on her work, but she paused and looked up when she saw him. Her expression was cautious as always, but there was a hint of acknowledgement in her eyes. Thomas dismounted and approached slowly. "Good morning," he said. "I hope I'm not intruding." Maria shook her head slightly. "You are not intruding, Thomas. You are welcome, but remember, I have my rules. Respect them and you will be safe here." Thomas nodded. "I understand," he said. "I will follow your rules." There was a silence for a moment, broken only by the soft rustle of the wind and the distant calls of birds. Over the next few days, Thomas stayed at the cabin, helping Maria with her daily tasks. He learned to fetch water from a nearby stream, gather firewood, and repair parts of the cabin that had been damaged by storms. Maria watched him carefully, correcting his mistakes with patience but firmness. She had a way of teaching without words, guiding him with subtle gestures and small instructions. One morning, as Thomas was carrying a bucket of water, he noticed Maria sitting on a rock, staring into the distance. She looked lost in thought, her hands resting on her knees. Thomas approached cautiously. "Are you all right?" he asked. Maria turned to him, her eyes reflecting a deep sadness. "I am fine," she said softly. "But sometimes the past comes back, even when you try to forget it." Thomas sensed that she was referring to something painful, something she had not shared. He did not press, knowing that trust had to come slowly. "You don't have to talk about it," he said gently. "I only want to be here if you need someone." Maria nodded, appreciating his respect for her boundaries. As the days passed, Thomas began to learn more about Maria's life. She told him fragments of her story, small pieces that revealed her strength and resilience. She had grown up in a village that had been peaceful and full of life until it was destroyed by raiders. She had lost her family in that attack and had survived alone in the wilderness ever since. Her voice was calm when she spoke, but Thomas could see the pain in her eyes. Despite the sadness in her past, Maria was determined to survive. She had learned to hunt, gather food, and protect herself from danger. She carried a hidden weapon, a symbol of her readiness to defend herself if necessary. Thomas noticed the careful way she handled every task, the way she observed the land and the animals, always alert, always prepared. Her strength was not just physical, it was mental and emotional, honed by years of survival. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Thomas and Maria sat by the fire, sharing a simple meal of roasted meat and bread. The sky was painted with shades of orange and purple, and the wind carried the faint scent of wildflowers. Thomas looked at Maria and said, "You have survived so much. How do you keep going?" Maria looked into the fire, her eyes reflecting the dancing flames. "I do not think of giving up," she said quietly. "I focus on what I must do to live. Every day is a challenge, but I face it. That is how I survive." Thomas nodded, understanding that her words were more than just about survival. They were about courage, about refusing to be broken by tragedy. As they talked, Thomas began to sense a deeper part of Maria's character. She was not only strong and brave, but she was also cautious. She had learned to trust few people, and she guarded her heart carefully. Thomas respected this about her, knowing that true connection could not be forced. He realized that earning her trust would take time and patience. Over the next few days, Thomas and Maria worked together on small projects around the cabin. Thomas repaired the roof, strengthened the walls, and helped Maria build a small storage area for food. Maria guided him with quiet instructions, sometimes correcting him gently, sometimes demonstrating the task herself. Their cooperation created a sense of partnership, even though Maria remained reserved. One afternoon, Thomas noticed a group of wild horses in the distance. He suggested they try to approach them, hoping to learn more about Maria's skills in handling animals. Maria agreed, but she warned him to be careful. "Wild horses are not tame," she said. "They can sense fear and weakness. You must be confident or they will run." Thomas nodded, understanding that this was not just about riding horses. It was about learning to respect nature and trust his instincts. Together, they approached the horses slowly, moving with patience and caution. Maria demonstrated how to calm the animals, speaking softly and using gentle gestures. Thomas followed her lead, feeling a mixture of fear and excitement. Gradually, he began to understand the importance of observation, patience, and respect. By the end of the day, they had managed to get close enough to touch the horses, a small triumph that filled them both with satisfaction. During these days, Thomas noticed small signs of Maria's past life. She had scars on her arms and hands, remnants of past struggles. She sometimes flinched at sudden noises, a reminder of dangers she had faced. Yet, despite these signs, she moved with confidence and purpose, a testament to her resilience. Thomas admired her deeply, not only for her physical skills but for the courage and determination that defined her character. One evening, as they sat by the fire, Thomas asked Maria about her family. She hesitated, then spoke softly. "I had a family once," she said. "They were taken from me. I survived, but I do not speak of them often. The memories are painful." Thomas reached out but did not touch her. He wanted her to know he cared, but he also respected her space. "I understand," he said. "You do not have to share more than you wish. I only want to be here if you need someone to listen." Maria looked at him, a flicker of gratitude in her eyes. She had been alone for so long, relying only on herself. To have someone who respected her boundaries and offered support without demanding it was rare. She did not speak, but her silence was a quiet acknowledgement that she appreciated his presence. As the days turned into a week, Thomas and Maria developed a routine. They worked together during the day, prepared meals, and shared stories by the fire at night. Thomas learned to understand the rhythms of life on the plains, the careful balance of survival, and the importance of observation and preparation. Maria, in turn, began to see Thomas as a trustworthy companion, someone who respected her independence while offering support. One night, as a storm rolled in, Thomas noticed Maria's expression change. She moved with swift precision, securing the cabin and gathering supplies. He followed her lead, helping where he could. The storm raged outside, with heavy rain and strong winds, but inside the cabin, they worked together to ensure safety and comfort. Thomas marveled at her skills and the calm confidence with which she faced danger. After the storm passed, they sat by the fire, drying off and sharing a simple meal. Thomas looked at Maria and said, "You are incredible. I have never met anyone like you." Maria smiled faintly, a rare gesture, and said, "I have had to be. Life here is not easy, and weakness is not an option." Thomas nodded, understanding that her strength was born from necessity, shaped by experiences that few could imagine. As the night grew quiet, Thomas reflected on everything he had learned. Maria's story was only partially revealed, but it was enough to show the depth of her character. She had faced unimaginable challenges, survived against the odds, and maintained her independence and dignity. Thomas knew that there was more to her story, secrets that she guarded closely, but he also knew that trust and understanding would grow over time. Maria, too, thought about Thomas. He had come into her life quietly, without demands or judgments. He had offered support while respecting her boundaries. She felt a cautious sense of connection, a recognition that perhaps, after so much loss and struggle, she could allow someone to be near her, even if only slightly. Her past had made her strong, but it had also made her wary. Trust was not given lightly. It was earned. The days that followed continued in a rhythm of work, learning, and quiet companionship. Thomas admired Maria's skill in survival, her careful attention to the land, and her courage in the face of danger. Maria observed Thomas's patience, respect, and willingness to learn. Slowly, a bond was forming, built on trust, respect, and shared experiences. One afternoon, as they rested by the stream after a long morning of work, Thomas asked, "Do you ever wish things had been different?" Maria looked at him, thoughtful. "Sometimes," she said, "but the past cannot be changed. We can only live with what we have and find our own way forward." Thomas nodded, understanding that her resilience was not just about surviving, but about accepting life and moving forward despite hardships. As the sun began to set, they returned to the cabin. The fire was lit, casting warm light across the room. Thomas helped Maria prepare dinner, and they shared the meal in comfortable silence. The wind whispered outside, and the stars began to appear in the sky. Both felt the quiet satisfaction of a day well spent, of work accomplished, and of companionship earned. That night, as Thomas lay on his bedroll, he thought about the woman he had met. Maria was unlike anyone he had ever known. She had survived tragedy, endured hardship, and maintained her independence. She was cautious, strong, and wise beyond her years. Thomas realized that her story was only beginning to unfold before him, and he felt honored to witness it. Maria, too, reflected on the past week. She had allowed Thomas into her life, even if only a little. His respect for her rules, his willingness to learn, and his calm presence had made her consider the possibility of trust. She knew that survival required strength, but it also required careful judgment about who to allow close. Thomas had shown that he might be worthy of that trust, but time would tell. The plains were quiet that night, the wind soft against the cabin walls. Inside, two lives continued to intertwine, slowly, cautiously, but with growing understanding. Thomas had begun to see the depth of Maria's courage, and Maria had begun to see the possibility of connection without compromise to her independence. For now, the story was still unfolding, the secrets of Maria's past still guarded, and the bond between them slowly growing. The next days would bring new challenges, new lessons, and deeper revelations about the strength, courage, and wisdom that had kept Maria alive through everything. The days passed slowly, each blending into the next with the steady rhythm of survival and work. Thomas and Maria had established a quiet routine. Morning light found them tending the garden, repairing the cabin, or walking through the plains to check traps and hunt for food. Even in their silence, there was a growing understanding, a rhythm of companionship that neither had expected. Thomas noticed subtle changes in Maria. She still carried herself with fierce independence, her eyes sharp and alert, but there were moments when she seemed to relax in his presence. She no longer flinched when he approached too closely, and sometimes she even allowed him to assist her in ways that previously would have been unthinkable. Thomas recognized these small gestures as signs of trust, though he never took them for granted. One evening, a storm approached. Dark clouds rolled across the horizon, and the wind carried the scent of rain. Maria moved quickly and efficiently, securing the cabin, gathering supplies, and ensuring that everything was in place. Thomas followed her lead, helping where he could, but she rarely gave direct instructions. Instead, she guided him with gestures and sharp glances, teaching him to anticipate needs rather than wait for commands. As the storm raged outside, thunder echoing across the plains, Thomas noticed a flicker of unease in Maria's eyes. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but he had learned to read her expressions. "Is something wrong?" he asked softly, careful not to alarm her. Maria hesitated, then shook her head. "No," she said quietly, "it is nothing. The storm brings memories, but they do not harm me. I am ready." Thomas did not press further. He had learned that some things in her past were too delicate to confront directly. Instead, he focused on the task at hand, helping her secure the cabin and ensure their safety. Despite the fearsome storm, Maria moved with a calm determination that left Thomas in awe. She was a woman who had faced unimaginable dangers and survived. Now even a storm seemed manageable under her guidance. As the night wore on, the storm passed, leaving the plains wet and sparkling under the moonlight. The air was fresh, carrying the scent of damp earth and rain-soaked grass. Thomas and Maria sat by the fire, drying off and sharing a simple meal. The cabin was warm and safe, a small refuge in the vast, wild landscape. Thomas watched Maria as she ate, noticing the quiet intensity in her eyes. He had seen glimpses of her past, the scars on her hands and arms, the careful way she moved, and the stories she had told in fragments. But there was a deeper truth he had yet to uncover, a secret that defined who she was and why she had survived when so many others had not. Maria, sensing his curiosity, finally spoke. Her voice was low, measured, and steady, but carried a weight that made Thomas sit up straighter. "Thomas," she said, "there is something I have not told you. Something that you may not understand, but it is the reason I am still alive." Thomas leaned forward, his heart beating faster. He had sensed that this moment would come, that the trust he had earned might allow him a glimpse into her past. Maria took a deep breath, her eyes fixed on the fire. "My village was destroyed when I was young. Raiders came at night, burning everything in their path. My family, they were killed before my eyes. I could not stop them. I could not save them. I ran, hiding among the rocks and trees, watching as everything I loved disappeared." Her voice trembled slightly, but she did not break. Thomas remained silent, listening with rapt attention. "I survived," she continued, "not because of luck, but because I learned to fight, to be clever, and to anticipate danger. I had to. Every day was a choice between life and death. I became someone I did not know I could be, a warrior, a survivor, someone who could face fear without turning away." She paused, her hands resting on her knees, fingers tracing the patterns of the animal skins beneath them. Thomas could see the determination in her eyes, the fierce pride that coexisted with the sorrow she carried. "That is why I live," she said softly, almost as if speaking to herself. "Because I refused to die, even when everything I loved was taken from me. Because I knew that weakness would mean the end, and I am still here." Thomas reached out but did not touch her. He understood that physical gestures were not necessary. Her words alone carried the weight of her experience. "Maria," he said quietly, "I cannot imagine what you have been through, but I can see your strength, your courage. It is remarkable. You are extraordinary." Maria looked at him then, and for the first time there was a spark of vulnerability in her gaze. She had shared a part of herself that few had ever known, and in doing so, she allowed Thomas a rare glimpse into her soul. "If you touch me," she said softly, almost in a whisper, "you will understand why I am still alive, not because of my body, but because of my spirit. Because I refuse to be broken, no matter what the world threw at me." Thomas nodded slowly, absorbing her words. He did not reach out, not yet. He knew that trust was a fragile thing, something that had to be earned and respected. "I understand," he said. "And I promise to respect you always. Your strength, your choices, everything about you." In the days that followed, Thomas and Maria continued their routines, but now there was a subtle shift between them. The bond of trust had deepened, strengthened by the sharing of secrets and the acknowledgement of strength. Thomas saw Maria in a new light, not just as a skilled survivor, but as someone who had endured unimaginable hardship and emerged stronger than most could ever hope to be. One afternoon, Thomas suggested they explore a nearby canyon. Maria agreed, though she remained cautious. As they walked through the rugged terrain, Thomas observed her movements, how she navigated the rocks, how she anticipated danger, how she remained alert to the slightest sound. It was clear that every step she took was informed by years of survival, by instincts honed in the face of relentless danger. During their walk, Thomas asked more about her past, careful not to push too far. Maria shared small stories, how she had learned to track animals, how she had defended herself against those who sought to harm her, and how she had built a life from nothing after losing everything. Each story revealed a layer of her resilience, a testament to her courage and intelligence. Thomas was deeply moved. He realized that Maria's survival was not just about strength or skill. It was about her mind, her ability to think ahead, to strategize, and to remain calm in the face of fear. She was a master of her environment, able to turn even the most dangerous situations to her advantage. Her life had been a constant test, and she had passed every challenge. As the sun began to set, they returned to the cabin, their faces glowing with the warmth of the fading light. Thomas helped Maria gather firewood, and together they prepared a simple meal. The wind carried the scents of the plains, and the distant mountains cast long shadows across the land. There was a sense of peace, a quiet understanding that had grown between them over the past days. That night, as they sat by the fire, Thomas reflected on everything Maria had shared. He thought about her past, the loss of her family, the dangers she had faced, and the courage it had taken to survive. He realized that her words, "Touch me and you'll know why I'm still alive," were not just about physical survival, but about the spirit and strength that defined her. Maria, too, thought about the trust she had placed in Thomas. She had allowed him a glimpse into her past, revealing the experiences that had shaped her. It was a significant step, one that could not be undone. She felt a mixture of relief and caution, knowing that while she had shared her truth, she still had control over how much of herself she allowed others to see. The storm that had passed earlier had left the plains refreshed, and the night air was cool and clean. Thomas and Maria sat quietly, the fire crackling between them. Words were not necessary. The bond they had formed spoke louder than any conversation. There was respect, understanding, and a recognition of the courage that had kept Maria alive all these years. In the following days, Thomas noticed that Maria was slightly more relaxed in his presence. She still maintained her independence and vigilance, but there were moments of ease, of small smiles, and of shared laughter that had not been present before. Thomas understood that these were signs of trust, indicators that their connection was growing deeper, grounded in mutual respect and understanding. One afternoon, as they worked together repairing a section of the cabin, Thomas asked, "Do you ever wish someone had been there for you when you were younger?" Maria paused, looking at him with a distant expression. "Sometimes," she said quietly. "But I have learned that strength comes from facing life alone. I survived because I had no choice, and I became who I am because of it." Thomas nodded. He realized that Maria's strength was not just in surviving danger, but in accepting the hardships of life and transforming them into resilience. She was a woman who had faced loss and fear head-on, who had learned to rely on herself and trust only those who proved worthy. Her life was a testament to courage, determination, and the will to endure. As the sun set over the plains, painting the sky in shades of gold and purple, Thomas and Maria sat by the fire. The bond between them had deepened, built on shared experiences, respect, and the revelation of past struggles. Thomas knew that their story was only beginning, and that there were more lessons to be learned, more challenges to face, and more truths to uncover. Maria, looking into the fire, reflected on her journey. She had shared a part of herself that few had ever known, and in doing so, she had allowed a small connection to form. She remained cautious, but she also recognized the value of companionship, of someone who could see her strength and respect her choices. Her past had shaped her, but it had not defined her future. The night settled over the plains, quiet and calm. Thomas and Maria sat in the glow of the fire, two lives intertwined by trust, respect, and the shared understanding of courage. The next days would bring new challenges and opportunities, and perhaps deeper revelations about the strength and resilience that had kept Maria alive through everything. The days following Maria's confession were quiet, but Thomas could sense that something was shifting in the air. The plains seemed unusually still, the wind carrying a strange tension that neither of them could ignore. Thomas noticed Maria's sharp eyes scanning the horizon more often, her hands tightening briefly when distant sounds reached her ears. He knew from experience that her instincts were rarely wrong. One morning, as the sun rose in a soft glow over the mountains, Thomas spotted movement in the distance. A small group of men rode toward the cabin, their horses kicking up dust that drifted across the plains. Thomas felt a chill in his chest. He turned to Maria, who was already observing the riders with keen attention. Her face was calm, but her eyes burned with focus. "They are outlaws," Maria said quietly, almost to herself. "They are not from around here, but they are dangerous." "We must be ready," Thomas nodded. He had encountered outlaws before, but he had never faced anyone with the precision and calm that Maria now displayed. She began moving swiftly, gathering supplies, checking weapons, and planning their next steps. Thomas followed her lead, helping where he could. Maria did not issue direct orders. Instead, she directed him with gestures and subtle cues. Her experience in surviving danger was evident in every action she took. She had faced threats far worse than this in the past, and her calm determination reassured Thomas even as the tension grew. By mid-morning, the outlaws were closer. Thomas could see them clearly now, 5 men, armed and dangerous, looking for easy targets. Maria motioned for Thomas to stay hidden behind the cabin while she positioned herself strategically. "We do not fight blindly," she said. "We use the land, the terrain, and our knowledge. They will not see us coming until it is too late." Thomas nodded, trusting her judgment completely. The first of the outlaws approached the cabin, unaware of the careful trap Maria had prepared. She had studied the terrain, identified vantage points, and created escape routes, all while keeping Thomas close enough to assist if needed. Her movements were precise, calculated, and efficient. Thomas marveled at her skill, realizing that her survival was not just about courage. It was about intelligence, strategy, and foresight. When the outlaws reached the clearing, Maria made her move. She emerged from her hiding place with a swift, confident strike, disarming the first man before he could react. The other outlaws looked around in confusion, but Maria had anticipated every reaction. Thomas joined her, helping to subdue another man, and together they worked seamlessly. The outlaws were strong, but Maria's cunning and Thomas's support proved overwhelming. One of the men tried to flee, but Maria was already 2 steps ahead. She blocked his escape route, using her knowledge of the terrain to corner him. "Do not move," she commanded, her voice steady and authoritative. The man froze, realizing he had underestimated her. Thomas helped secure the remaining outlaws, tying them together and ensuring they could not escape. When the confrontation was over, Thomas and Maria stood in the quiet clearing, catching their breath. The dust had settled and the outlaws were subdued, their threat neutralized. Thomas looked at Maria with admiration and awe. "You are incredible," he said. "I have never seen anyone handle danger like that." Maria smiled faintly, a rare gesture, and replied, "I have had to be. Life does not forgive weakness. Every day is a choice to survive, and I have learned to make the right one." After securing the outlaws, Thomas and Maria returned to the cabin. They worked together to repair minor damages and ensure that everything was safe. Thomas noticed that Maria moved with a mixture of caution and confidence, her eyes constantly scanning the surroundings. He realized that her alertness was not fear, it was preparation. She had faced threats far worse than these men and had survived every time. That night, as the fire crackled and the stars appeared in the sky, Thomas and Maria sat quietly. The events of the day had deepened their bond, highlighting Maria's strength and skill. Thomas felt a profound respect for her, not just for her ability to survive, but for the courage and intelligence that had guided her through life. Maria, for her part, reflected on the confrontation. She had tested Thomas, observing how he responded under pressure, and she had seen his calm, steady nature. He had not panicked, had not acted recklessly, and had supported her in ways that reinforced her trust. For the first time in a long while, she felt that she could rely on someone other than herself without fear. In the days that followed, Thomas and Maria continued their routines, but now there was an unspoken understanding between them. They worked together with a new level of cooperation, each aware of the other's strengths and abilities. Thomas learned more about Maria's strategies, her careful planning, and her deep understanding of the land. Maria, in turn, began to allow him more involvement, testing his skills and judgment in small ways. One afternoon, Thomas suggested they expand the cabin's storage area. Maria agreed, but she also turned the task into a lesson, showing him how to construct secure compartments, how to store food safely, and how to plan for emergencies. Thomas listened and observed carefully, realizing that every skill Maria possessed was born from necessity and experience. Her methods were efficient, effective, and precise, and he admired her dedication to survival. As they worked, Thomas asked about the people Maria had encountered in her past. She shared stories of friends and allies she had made along the way, people who had helped her briefly before disappearing from her life. Each story revealed a piece of her resilience, a testament to her ability to navigate a world filled with danger and uncertainty. Thomas realized that her life had been a constant balancing act, requiring trust, judgment, and courage at every turn. That evening, as they prepared for bed, Thomas asked, "Do you ever wish things had been different? That life had been easier?" Maria looked at him, her expression thoughtful. "Sometimes," she admitted, "but the hardships have made me who I am. They have taught me strength, patience, and wisdom. I would not be alive today without them, and I would not want to be anyone else." Thomas nodded, understanding the depth of her words. Maria's survival was not just physical, it was mental, emotional, and spiritual. She had faced loss, danger, and fear, yet she had emerged stronger, wiser, and more determined than ever. Her life was a testament to resilience, courage, and the unbreakable human spirit. Over the next few days, the plains seemed calm again, but Thomas and Maria knew that danger could return at any time. They continued to prepare, gathering supplies, reinforcing the cabin, and practicing strategies for defense. Thomas learned quickly, guided by Maria's expertise and her calm, authoritative instructions. He realized that survival required more than strength. It required knowledge, preparation, and the ability to remain calm under pressure. One morning, as they worked near the stream, Thomas asked Maria about the weapon she carried. She hesitated, then explained, "This is not just a tool. It is a reminder of what I have endured and what I must be ready to face. It is a part of my life, and it has kept me alive more times than I can count." Thomas nodded, understanding that her weapon was both a physical and symbolic extension of her survival instincts. As the sun rose higher, casting light over the plains, Thomas and Maria continued their work, side by side. The bond between them had grown stronger, forged through shared experiences, trust, and mutual respect. They had faced danger together, tested each other's skills, and emerged with a deeper understanding of one another. That night, as they sat by the fire, Thomas reflected on the events of the past days. He realized that Maria's life had been shaped by challenges far greater than most could imagine. Her strength was remarkable, not just because she survived, but because she faced danger with intelligence, patience, and courage. He felt privileged to witness her skills and to be trusted as a companion in her world. Maria, looking into the fire, thought about the partnership she and Thomas had developed. He had proven himself trustworthy, capable, and calm under pressure. For the first time in a long while, she felt that she could rely on someone without fear. She still valued her independence and her strength, but she also recognized the value of cooperation, of having a companion who respected her abilities and choices. The plains were quiet that night, the stars shining brightly overhead. Thomas and Maria sat in companionable silence, their thoughts reflecting on the lessons learned and the challenges faced. They had survived danger together, strengthened their bond, and deepened their understanding of one another. The next days would bring new trials and opportunities, but they were ready to face them together, guided by trust, courage, and resilience. As Thomas prepared his bedroll, he realized that he had come to admire Maria not only for her survival skills but for her spirit, her intelligence, and her unwavering determination. She had faced unimaginable hardships and emerged stronger, teaching him lessons that went beyond survival, lessons about courage, trust, and the power of resilience. Maria, watching the fire, felt a rare sense of calm. The outlaws had tested them and they had prevailed. She had seen Thomas's strength, his patience, and his ability to learn. She allowed herself a small smile, recognizing that the bond they shared was growing stronger, rooted in respect, trust, and mutual understanding. The night deepened, and the wind whispered through the plains. Inside the cabin, two lives continued to intertwine, shaped by the challenges they had faced and the trust they had built. Thomas and Maria were ready for whatever the future held, knowing that together they could face danger, overcome challenges, and navigate the harsh world of the plains with courage and determination. The days following the confrontation with the outlaws settled into a quiet rhythm, but Thomas could sense that something significant had shifted between him and Maria. It was not just the trust they had built or the skills they had shared, but a deeper understanding that life was more than mere survival. They had faced danger together, and now there was a subtle, unspoken bond that neither could ignore. Morning light spilled across the plains, illuminating the cabin and the small garden Maria had nurtured with care. Birds sang in the distance, and the wind carried the scent of wildflowers and damp earth. Thomas rose early, as he had learned to do, and began preparing breakfast while Maria moved quietly outside, checking the perimeter and gathering firewood. Each of them worked with purpose, yet there was a peacefulness in their actions, a sense of routine that was comforting. As Thomas placed a pot of water over the fire, he noticed Maria sitting on a rock, her gaze distant. He approached cautiously, careful not to startle her. "Are you thinking about yesterday?" he asked softly. Maria shook her head slightly, then smiled faintly. "I am thinking about tomorrow," she replied. "About what we must do to remain safe and how life continues even after danger passes." Thomas nodded, recognizing the wisdom in her words. After breakfast, they set out to explore the nearby hills, checking for any signs of threats and gathering materials that might be useful for the cabin. Thomas observed Maria's movements carefully, how she scanned the horizon, how she moved silently and efficiently, and how she communicated with him without words. Every gesture and glance carried meaning, teaching him lessons in awareness, patience, and strategy. During a quiet moment on a hilltop, Thomas asked, "Maria, do you ever feel lonely even after all you've survived?" She looked at him, her eyes reflecting the depth of her experiences. "Lonely," she repeated softly. "Sometimes, but loneliness is different from fear or danger. I have learned to be alone without feeling empty. I have learned to rely on myself and to value my independence. But companionship, that is different. That is something rare and precious." Thomas understood. He had seen her strength and independence, but he also recognized the subtle moments when she allowed herself to connect, to trust, and to share. He realized that true companionship was not about dependence, but about mutual respect, understanding, and support. "I am grateful to be here," he said quietly, "to walk this path with you even in small ways." Maria nodded, acknowledging his words without speaking further. She had come to trust him not blindly, but through shared experiences, challenges, and respect. She allowed him into her world, knowing that he could see her strength, her pain, and her resilience without fear or judgment. As they descended the hills, they noticed a herd of deer grazing in the distance. Maria motioned for Thomas to stay low and move carefully. Together, they approached the herd slowly, learning to observe without disturbing. Maria demonstrated how to read the land, how to anticipate the movements of animals, and how to remain calm and patient. Thomas followed her lead, realizing that her skills were not just about survival. They were about understanding, connecting with, and respecting the natural world. After a successful hunt, they returned to the cabin, preparing the meat and storing it carefully. Thomas marveled at Maria's knowledge of preservation, her attention to detail, and her ability to make even the smallest task meaningful. Every day with her was a lesson, every moment an opportunity to learn about resilience, courage, and careful judgment. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Thomas and Maria sat by the fire, sharing a quiet meal. The air was filled with the sounds of the plains, the distant call of an owl, the rustle of leaves, and the soft whisper of the wind. Thomas looked at Maria and asked, "Do you ever regret the choices you've made?" Maria paused, considering the question. "Regret," she said. "No, every choice, even the hardest ones, brought me here. Every challenge, every danger, every loss, they made me stronger, wiser, and more aware. I do not regret survival, and I do not regret the lessons life has taught me." Thomas nodded, feeling the weight and truth of her words. He realized that her life had been shaped not just by survival, but by acceptance, wisdom, and courage. Maria had endured what few could imagine, and yet she had emerged with strength, dignity, and an unwavering sense of self. In the following days, Thomas and Maria continued to work together on the cabin and the surrounding land. They reinforced structures, gathered food, and explored new areas, always attentive to the rhythms of the plains. Thomas had become proficient in many tasks, guided by Maria's expertise and careful instruction. But more importantly, he had learned to understand the mindset required for survival, the patience, the observation, and the ability to remain calm under pressure. One afternoon, as they repaired a section of the cabin roof, Thomas asked Maria about her family once more. She hesitated, then spoke softly. "I have no family now," she said. "Those I loved are gone, but life continues. The land, the animals, the people I meet, these are my family now. I carry their memory with me, but I live in the present and I protect what I can." Thomas listened intently, understanding that her past shaped her, but it did not define her present or future. As the sun set, casting long shadows across the plains, Thomas and Maria sat outside the cabin, enjoying the warmth of the fire and the quiet beauty of the evening. The bond between them had grown strong, rooted in trust, respect, and shared experiences. Thomas felt a deep admiration for Maria, not just for her survival skills, but for her wisdom, resilience, and courage. Maria, in turn, reflected on the changes in her life. She had allowed Thomas into her world, trusting him with her presence and her story. She recognized his patience, his willingness to learn, and his ability to support without judgment. For the first time in a long while, she felt that she could share her life with someone without compromising her independence. The following morning brought new challenges. Thomas suggested they explore a nearby river, hoping to find fresh water and perhaps fish for their meals. Maria agreed, cautioning him about the terrain and the potential dangers of swift currents. Together, they made their way to the riverbank, moving carefully over rocks and through thick grass. Thomas observed Maria's skill in navigating the landscape, noting how she read the signs of nature and anticipated obstacles before they appeared. At the river, they worked together to catch fish, using techniques Maria had learned in her years of survival. Thomas marveled at her precision, patience, and knowledge. Every action was deliberate, efficient, and informed by experience. Maria taught him not just the skills themselves, but the mindset required to succeed, to remain calm, focused, and respectful of the natural world. As they cooked the fish over a small fire, Thomas asked Maria about her philosophy on life. She looked at him thoughtfully, then spoke. "Life is about balance," she said. "It is about understanding what you can control and what you cannot. It is about using your strength wisely and respecting the power of the world around you. Survival is not enough. You must live fully, even in hardship." Thomas nodded, realizing that her words applied not just to survival, but to living with integrity, awareness, and courage. Maria had endured unimaginable challenges, yet she maintained her sense of self, her independence, and her connection to the world. Her life was a testament to resilience, wisdom, and the human spirit. That evening, as they returned to the cabin, Thomas noticed a sense of peace in Maria that he had not seen before. She moved with confidence, her eyes alert but relaxed, and there was a quiet warmth in her demeanor. He understood that the bond they had built, through trust, shared experiences, and mutual respect, had created a new sense of security for both of them. Over the next few days, they worked together to further improve the cabin and the surrounding land. They planted additional crops, reinforced structures, and prepared for the unpredictable challenges of life on the plains. Thomas's skills had grown, guided by Maria's patient instruction, but more importantly, he had learned to think like her, to anticipate, observe, and remain calm under pressure. One night, as they sat by the fire, Thomas asked, "Maria, do you ever wish for more than survival?" "For connection, for companionship." Maria looked into the flames, her eyes reflecting the light of the fire. "Yes," she said softly, "but connection must be earned and chosen carefully. I have learned to trust my instincts, and I know when someone is worthy of my presence." "You have shown patience, respect, and understanding. That matters more than anything else." Thomas felt a surge of gratitude and admiration. He realized that Maria's strength was not just in her physical abilities, but in her discernment, wisdom, and courage. She had faced unimaginable hardships, yet she had maintained her independence and her ability to choose who she allowed into her life. In the following weeks, the bond between Thomas and Maria grew even stronger. They faced small challenges together, storms, wildlife, and the unpredictability of the plains, but they did so with cooperation, trust, and respect. Each day reinforced their connection, and Thomas continued to learn from Maria's experience and insight. One morning, as the sun rose over the horizon, Thomas looked at Maria and said, "You have taught me more than I could have imagined, not just about survival, but about courage, trust, and living fully." Maria smiled faintly. "And you have shown me that connection can exist without compromise. That companionship can be chosen wisely, and that trust can grow slowly, steadily, and without fear." As the weeks turned into months, Thomas and Maria continued to thrive on the plains. They had built a life together, grounded in trust, respect, and shared experiences. Maria's strength, resilience, and wisdom had guided them through challenges, while Thomas's patience, support, and willingness to learn had strengthened their bond. One evening, as the sun set and the stars appeared in the sky, Thomas and Maria sat by the fire, reflecting on the journey they had shared. The plains were calm, the wind gentle, and the fire crackled warmly. They had faced danger, shared stories, and built a life together, one that honored both independence and connection. Maria looked at Thomas, her eyes reflecting the firelight. "I have survived because I refused to be broken," she said softly. "But I have also survived because I learned to trust, to share, and to accept the presence of someone worthy. You are that person, Thomas, and together we will continue to face whatever comes, stronger than before." Thomas reached out and gently took her hand, understanding the weight and meaning of her words. He did not need to speak. Her trust, strength, and courage were evident in every gesture, every glance, and every shared moment. Together, they had built a bond that would endure, grounded in respect, courage, and the unbreakable human spirit. The plains stretched endlessly around them, wild and beautiful, a testament to life's challenges and possibilities. Inside the cabin, Thomas and Maria sat together, their hearts and minds aligned, ready to face the future with courage, wisdom, and the knowledge that survival was not just about endurance, but about connection, trust, and the strength to live fully.